listener name, buckle up, because today we're diving into Insidious Chapter 2. And wow, your analysis really blew me away.
Glad to hear it.
I thought I knew this film, but you really went deep.
Always happy to explore the further.
Well, you've definitely earned your flashlight and proton pack with this one, because this deep dive is going to be seriously spooky.
I'm game if you are.
Let's do it. You know what struck me right off the bat is how this film isn't just about those cheap jump scares.
Right.
It's like a masterclass in psychological horror.
It really is. You know what I find fascinating about this film is how it doesn't just throw random spooky stuff at you. It's like it's drawing from classic Gothic literature.
Oh, totally.
You know, those creepy old houses with the hidden rooms and the family secrets and that creeping sense of madness.
And the taxidermied animals on the wall?
Exactly. It's all there. And it all works to create this atmosphere of dread that just seeps into your bones.
Like that whole concept of the house being a character itself.
Right.
Reflecting the family's trauma.
Right.
Gave me chills just reading that part of your analysis.
It's such a clever way to ground the horror in something real. You know, so often in haunted house movies, the house is just a backdrop for the scares.
Right.
But in Insidious Chapter 2, the house is practically a character itself, and its decay mirrors the family's own internal struggles.
Okay, so we've got the creepy house down.
Yeah.
But then there's Parker Crane, the bride in black.
Yeah.
Your analysis makes a great point about how they're terrifying but also tragic.
Absolutely. Parker's backstory adds this whole other layer of horror to the film. It's not just about being scared, it's about the lasting impact of trauma and how it can manifest in truly terrifying ways.
And that trauma seems to permeate the entire film. The analysis points out that it's not just Parker, but Josh and the whole family dealing with these echoes of the past.
Exactly. And that's what makes the film so effective. It's not just about the supernatural, it's about the very real ways that trauma can haunt us.
It makes you wonder if the further is like the film suggests, what unresolved issues might we be carrying around?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? This idea of unresolved trauma manifesting in scary ways. I mean, don't we all have things we try to bury deep down? What if those things could literally come back to haunt us? That's what makes this film so effective. It taps into that universal fear.
It's like the film is saying you can't outrun your past, especially when it comes to trauma.
Precisely. You know, your analysis called The Further a purgatory of unresolved emotions, which I think is such a powerful way to describe it, and the way the film portrays it visually with the cold colors and the unsettling stillness, it gets under your skin.
I still get chills thinking about it.
Yeah.
You know, I was really impressed with how your analysis got really detailed about the plot going scene by scene.
Oh, thanks. I tried to be thorough.
So let's start with the beginning. What did we learn about Josh's childhood that adds to the horror?
Well, the film revisits that hypnotic memory erasure that Elise performs in the first Insidious, you know?
Right.
We see how that act of repression, that metaphorical burying of his trauma, sets the stage for everything else. It's fascinating and tragic how that one event shaped his entire life.
And what's really clever is how that scene also introduces the idea that kids aren't immune to these dark forces. You know, the way it juxtaposes young Josh with the horrors of the further instantly tells the audience that no one is safe, not even children.
Exactly. And it adds this whole other level of unease to the film, knowing that even children are vulnerable to the horrors of the further.
So the family is back home after the first film, still reeling from their experience and dealing with the loss of Elise. What stood out to you about this section of the analysis?
I thought it was interesting how the analysis highlighted Renai's transformation in this film. She goes from being more passive to actively questioning what's happening around her. It's a classic horror trope, but it's done really well here.
You know what I find effective is how James Wan uses those classic haunted house tropes, but turns them inward. It's not just a creepy house, it's the fear that the person you love most in the world has become the threat.
That's what makes it so effective. It's that domestic dread layered on top of the supernatural. And speaking of dread, let's talk about Josh's possession. The analysis really dug into how the film portrays that slow, terrifying descent.
It's chilling to watch. What really stood out to you about how Wan portrays that on screen?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I think what really stood out to me was the emphasis on duality. You know how Patrick Wilson, he does a phenomenal job showing both sides of Josh. You see the loving father struggling to hold on, and then you see this chilling presence of Parker Crane slowly taking over.
It's like he's acting against himself, battling for control with every scene.
Exactly, and the analysis mentioned those subtle changes in his physicality too.
Yeah.
You can practically see the life being drained out of him as the possession takes hold. His posture, his movements, even his voice gradually shift. It's subtle, but incredibly effective.
and terrifying.
Yeah.
It taps into that universal fear of losing control,
Yeah.
of your body, your mind, your identity. And it's not just Josh dealing with this, right? The analysis points out that Renai is battling her own fears throughout the film.
Absolutely. She's facing the potential loss of everything: her husband, her family, her sanity, and her fear manifests in different ways, from paranoia and denial to these desperate attempts to cling to a version of reality that's clearly slipping away.
It's heartbreaking to watch, honestly. And speaking of heartbreaking, we have to talk about Parker Crane's backstory. Your analysis dives deep into it, and it's a lot.
It's incredibly sad. Seeing how Parker was abused, manipulated, forced into this identity that wasn't theirs. It adds this whole other dimension to the horror. Suddenly, Parker isn't just a terrifying presence, but a victim themselves.
Right. It makes you think about the cyclical nature of trauma. Parker's pain inflicted by their mother is now echoing in the haunting of the Lambert family. It's like those unresolved issues, those skeletons in the closet, they don't just disappear.
Precisely. It makes you think about the legacy we pass down sometimes unintentionally and how the past is never truly gone, especially when it comes to trauma.
It's heavy stuff, but so well done in the film. Now, the analysis also spends some time on the cinematic techniques one uses. And there was one term that caught my eye, something about negative space. I'll admit, I'm not entirely sure what that means in a filmmaking sense.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, it sounds more complicated than it is. Basically, negative space is when the camera lingers on an empty part of the frame, like a long hallway or an empty doorway.
Oh.
It creates that feeling that something could be there lurking just out of sight.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like when a character walks into a room and the camera stays on the doorway after they've passed. You fully expect something to jump out, even if nothing ever does.
Exactly. It's a classic horror technique, and James Wan is a master of using it to build suspense and dread. That anticipation, that fear of the unknown, can be just as effective as any jump scare.
Speaking of sound, your analysis mentioned how Insidious. Chapter 2 uses silence to amplify the terror, and I have to agree, those moments of quiet are almost unbearable.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly effective. That deliberate use of silence, followed by a sudden noise or a burst of music, it's like a punch to the gut. And speaking of music...
Don't even get me started on that score.
Hey!
Joseph Bishara knows how to get under your skin with those dissonant strings and jarring sound effects.
Yeah.
I swear that music alone is enough to give you nightmares.
It's brilliant, though, isn't it? It perfectly captures the unsettling, otherworldly nature of the further.
Speaking of which, the visual design of that realm is something else. So bleak and desolate. What aspects of the design did you find most effective?
I think they absolutely nailed that feeling of coldness and emptiness. The color palette, the lighting, the sparse set design, it all contributes to the sense that the further is a place devoid of life and hope.
It's like a visual representation of despair. And the way they distort familiar objects, like furniture or children's toys, it adds to the feeling that you've entered a realm where the rules of reality no longer apply.
And that's unsettling on a whole other level. It makes you question your perception, your sense of what's real, which is a hallmark of good psychological horror. It really messes with your mind.
It's true, and it makes Insidious, Chapter 2, so much more than just a standard haunted house movie.
Yeah.
It gets under your skin and makes you think about these big themes of trauma, family, and identity, even after the credits roll.
It certainly does. It's a film that stays with you long after you've seen it.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay, we've talked a bit about Josh's possession, but I wanted to circle back to it because the analysis really dives into the performances, especially Patrick Wilson's.
As it should. He's phenomenal at portraying that terrifying duality. One minute you see the fear and confusion in his eyes as Josh, like he knows something is wrong but can't stop it, and the next he's fully transformed into Parker. It's chilling.
It's like he becomes someone else entirely. Okay, on a slightly less terrifying note, the analysis also touches on the comedic relief provided by Specs and Tucker. What did you make of that aspect of the film? Did it work for you?
You know what? I think they work surprisingly well in the film.
Yeah.
They bring some much-needed levity without undermining the tension and the horror. Plus, their presence speaks to another theme that your analysis touched on, the idea that you need a support system when dealing with the supernatural.
You're absolutely right. You can't face these things alone.
It's like that old saying, the only thing worse than facing your demons is facing them alone. Having people you can trust who have your back, it's essential.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, we've covered so much ground already, but before we wrap things up, I wanted to touch on one more point from your analysis, the ending of Insidious. Chapter 2. It's not exactly a happy ending, is it? Leaves you with this unsettling feeling.
It's definitely open-ended. On the surface, it seems like there's resolution,
Right.
Josh's memories are repressed again, the family is back together, but then that final scene with Specs, Tucker, and Lisa's spirit, it's like the calm before the storm,
Right.
There's more to come.
And that lingering shot on Elise's worried face.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it completely changes the tone.
Exactly. And that's the genius of the Insidious franchise. It never really lets you off the hook. It taps into that primal fear that we're never truly safe from the things that go bump in the night, or in this case, the things that lurk in the shadows of our own minds.
Which leads perfectly into the question your analysis ended on, and it's one I haven't stopped thinking about. Considering how Insidious, Chapter 2 connects unresolved trauma with the supernatural. What does it say about our fascination with haunted houses? Are we drawn to them out of fear, or could it be something deeper?
It's such a fascinating question. On the surface, there's that thrill of the unknown, the adrenaline rush of being scared. But I think you're right, it goes deeper than that. Maybe it's about confronting those darker parts of ourselves, those fears and anxieties that we try to keep hidden.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own personal furthers, even if we don't have a direct connection to the specific trauma being portrayed on screen. Those feelings of fear, loss, and the unknown, they're universal.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's like a form of catharsis. We confront those fears in a safe environment through the lens of a film, and in doing so, we gain a little bit of power over them.
That's an amazing point.
Yeah.
It's like facing those demons alongside the characters, but with the safety of knowing it's not real life. And that makes me appreciate Insidious, Chapter 2 even more. It's entertaining, sure, but it also makes you think, makes you feel, and maybe even helps you process some of your own stuff along the way.
It's a great reminder that horror, when done well, can be incredibly powerful and thought-provoking.
Well said. Well, listener name. Thank you again for sending in this deep dive. It's been such a pleasure unpacking Insidious, Chapter 2 with you.
Absolutely. This has been a fantastic discussion.
And for everyone listening, if this conversation has sparked any thoughts, or maybe even inspired you to rewatch the film, let us know. We'd love to hear your take on it. Until next time, keep exploring those shadowy corners of your mind, but maybe sleep with the lights on.